and your life.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For some of you, it's spring break, like me. For some of you, it might not be. But regardless, thank you all for being here. Before we get started for introductions, I want to ground us on the purpose of today's meeting. I linked the agenda in the chat, but there's two framing questions that we're gonna base this meeting off of. It is, what's the intended outcomes of the blueprint? How do the blueprint outcomes align or not with state and federal accountability frameworks? How are LEAs held accountable, and what are the consequences of the evaluation of the blueprint? So before we get into some AAB updates by Rachel and a wonderful presentation by Emma, I want to kick us off with introductions since we do have some new folks here today. And everyone's going to go here. So your name, your role, and then your most passionate outcome slash metric slash evaluation, regardless if it's blueprint related or not. So I'll go first. My name is Javance Liu. You can call me Lou. I'm a teacher in Baltimore City. And my most passionate metric is regarding teacher retention rates. And I'll pass
To
it off to,
pause. Can I pause, Javons, and embarrass you for a quick second?
go ahead.
He failed to mention that he has been nominated by City Schools. Is it Teacher of the, what is it officially?
Oh yeah, City Schools Teacher of the Year.
Teacher. So a
Congratulations.
huge celebration to you. It's a big year, National Award and Teacher of the Year nominee.
All right, no, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, guys. But yeah, that's introductions, and I'll pass it off to Joni.
Oh, hi. Joni Palco, parent, and what am I passionate about? Gosh, definitely teacher retention for sure, and just students being able to get their scores back up for reading and math. That's it. I'm not sure who to pass it off to. I can't even see everybody's names. Who wants to go next? Anybody can go next.
So I'll jump in there. I'm Heather Clayball. I am the Associate Superintendent of Fiscal Services for Frederick County Public Schools. And I am passionate about budget as policy and how we can interact, how we can create a budget that reflects the strategic goals of our system and understanding how the growth that we are experiencing, one of the few counties in Maryland experiencing growth, impacts that policy and our ability to meet our goals. And I'm going to pass it off to Glenda.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm muted. Am I muted? No. Hi, everyone. I am Glenda Prime. I serve as the Dean of the School of Education and Urban Studies at Morgan State University. And I don't know if we have a metric for this, but it's the thing that I am most passionate about is students' sense of belonging. Because I feel that that is one of the most important determinants of school outcomes. Kids feeling that they belong in their classrooms and schools, and they belong in the classroom, and that they are capable of learning. That sense of belonging, I think, is critical. And I will pass this on to Evelyn.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Chung. I'm the Vice President of Education for the Montgomery County Council of PTAs. My passion is about how to bring this blueprint vision to scale and make sure that it's consistently applied across the different LEAs and schools. And I think the path to that would be the part that talks about high quality instructional materials and professional development. And the metric, I think there's a lot that we can do with expert review teams and the curriculum rubrics, and really meaningfully reviewing the local implementation plans. But it's harder work than just looking at a number. I will, I don't know who hasn't gone yet. Michael, hi. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Michael Brown, proud principal of Wild Lake High School in Howard County. I'm also the president of the Maryland Association for Secondary School Principals, and I'm also newly appointed the board chair for the Maryland Center for School Safety. So I think the couple of things I'm passionate about. One of them, you all already said that, but it is teacher recruitment and retention. Um, we need to make sure that our schools are representative of the students in which um, are in them, and so that is not always the case as of right now in the state of Maryland. And we need to do a better job of recruiting those teachers that represent the students in which that they serve. So that is really a passion of mine. I will also say this may or may not be a part of the blueprint, but I wouldn't be board chair of the Maryland Center for School Safety if it wasn't for me being passionate about school safety. We're really at a pivotal time in the state of Maryland. Even at my school, we've dealt with 2 student deaths in a month's time, and 2 students who were tragically murdered at the Columbia Mall. We have to do more to make sure students are safe in and outside of the school buildings here in the state of Maryland. It's getting to be a little bit ridiculous. And I think our state is better than that. And so those are some of the things that I'm really passionate about right now. I'll pass. I don't know. Let me see. There's a couple people not on camera. I can pass it to Jacob. I'm not sure if Jacob went or not.
I'm here. Yes,
How
yes.
you doing, sir?
Good. Yeah, so sorry about that. My wife just got home, so I had to be attentive to our little one for a second. But I'm Jacob, work in Prince George's County, in central office, dealing with records and transfers. And the one metric that always matters the most to me is, are the kids learning anything? Like, I want to know what the literacy scores are. I want to see math achievement. And those are what I think are the most important things, is, are the kids learning stuff? And I'm skeptical of some of the measures, but that's what I want to know mostly about is what's happening in the classrooms working? Is having teachers national board certified resulting in higher student achievement, and all those kinds of things? And let's see, who hasn't gone? Is there anybody left?
I haven't gone.
Crystalline.
Hey y'all, sorry, I'm walking home. So my name is Crystalline Thomas Davis, and I am the president of Literacy Lightbulb Corp. It's an education consulting firm. Also, I'm an adjunct professor at Morgan State. And I think the metric that kind of stands out the most to me would be progress monitoring as it relates to reading interventions in secondary classrooms. I think sometimes people assume that just because kids go to middle school that they understand everything and they can read fully, and that's not the case. In many teacher education programs, secondary teachers are not trained to actually lead reading interventions in the same way that elementary teachers are trained. So that's really where a lot of my focus is, and a metric that I like.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystalline. Candace, I know you just joined. Are you have to go next? We're just doing intros, name, role, and your most passionate outcome or metric, blueprint, or not related.
Hi, Candace Savage. I'm the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Worcester County. I'm an accountant by trade, so I'm definitely, most interested in this Pillar 5 and accountability and performance outcomes, and following the dollars to match the outcomes.
Thank you, Candace. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Sure. I am Rachel Amsitz, the policy director here at the AIB, and I've spent this entire time listening to all your answers, and I'd like to second them all, because I just don't know that I can pick one. But if I was forced to pick one, I think I would go globally, that all students in the state of Maryland are meeting the expectations and being prepared for the next step in their life. And I think that ties to all the rest. I'm passionate about our teachers, passionate about our kids, but I'm just ready to see this transformation really take off. And so that's my excitement.
Thank you, Rachel. I believe Emma, you are the last one.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Pellerin. I'm the Implementation Plan Director for the AIB and happy to be joining you all today. I think echoing what Rachel was saying, that it's difficult to pick one. So I'm actually going to take a pass on identifying one that is most critical, because it is really difficult to pick just one. And especially because I think that as we continue to learn about implementation too, we will be figuring out, what are really critical implementation measures over time. So what is identified as a leading indicator of progress or something really critical to measure in this phase of implementation, we might find out that there's other things that we should be looking at more closely as we learn about what impacts each part of Blueprint implementation has on student outcomes. So, I don't mean to pass on the opportunity here, but really just wanted to elevate that as we, learn about Blueprint implementation over time, especially, something of this magnitude not having been done in Maryland and really arguably elsewhere across the country. We're learning new things every day, and we will be learning about, what is really critical with regards to Blueprint implementation over the 10-year period. So thank you again, and happy to join you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. I believe that was everybody. I'm just linking the agenda one more time in the chat so you can see what is coming up next in our meeting. Before I kick it off to Rachel, I just want to say thank you all for sharing all your, I don't know, it's really lovely to hear all the different passions that people have in terms of metrics and outcomes. And again, I really appreciate this advisory committee because we all have such diverse perspectives in different seats in the whole within the education sphere. So as we go into our presentation later on, be sure to think about questions, especially from your perspective, your seat, so we can hopefully get them answered. With that, Rachel, I'll kick it off to you for AIB updates.
You bet. I just have a few to share with the committee and with the public. Those are that, well, the first one, advisory committee terms around here, we alternate every other year. We have some people that have the opportunity to cycle off or to re-up and stay on with us. And so we're about to hit that season where we'll be emailing all advisory committee members of every pillar to see if those whose year is an expiration year, if they want to stay on, or if they are looking to not continue. And then we'll be posting the application process for any vacancies that we do have. We also have student members. I know our student members aren't here tonight, but student members get a 1-year term with the opportunity to extend for 1 more year. The non-student member roles get a 2-year term with the opportunity to renew at the end of each of the 2 years. So I did just pull up the list if anybody needs to know what their cycle is. It should have been emailed to you at the when you were first accepting the appointment, but I can definitely just drop me a message and I can let you know, or I'll be in touch pretty soon and say, hey, will you stick with us or do you need a break? So you can expect to hear from me soon on that. I know that there are a ton of questions out there across the state about, so session's over, what happened? Yeah, we're working on that. And a lot happened. There was a lot of conversation about Blueprint, and it was truly down to the last day where things were still happening. And so we will have some legislative updates. We've been posting them to our website, and it's been advertised in our monthly emails that we send out to our distribution list. And so if you're not on our distribution list, we can get you on it. And then also I will drop a link to our website so that you can see where they are, the legislative updates. We hired a government relations person back in January, and Joy has been following session very closely and keeping us all up to date, which has just been phenomenal. She is working on kind of a final summary document that captures everything Blueprint related. But because things were happening right on up until a week ago when session ended, she's not done yet. There was just a lot that happened. So we're not really prepared today to be able to tell you all of the changes, but if there's something specific, I could answer a few of them. I'm most well-versed in career counseling. And so that one I can tell you about, and we could talk a little bit more if there's any other specific questions, or we can get back to you, and we'll be posting that update to our website and sharing it with all advisory committee members as soon as it's done, potentially this week, maybe next week. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was in our meeting last month, we talked about expert review teams, and there were some questions that were asked at the end that we said we would follow up on. We do have some updates on that, so I just wanted to share those quickly, and then there's some things that are still pending. So we've been working with our colleagues over at MSDE to get all of the reports from 23-24. And we're super, super close on those. I think the only ones outstanding at this point from last school year are the ones that were done by Mile. That's the group out of the University of Maryland, I believe. And they visited and then created LEA level reports, but there are not student level reports on that. So we will have an update for you with more information about that and how those will be handled in the ERT process soon. It's not a finalized decision yet. And then for this year, when we met in March, there were none posted for 24-25. There are now some posted for 24-25, and they're starting to get, more regularly posted, and we have a schedule in development that'll share when they'll be posted. So if you were interested in that topic and we're looking for those reports, if you go back to the MSDE webpage that had the schools listed that they were visiting, now after the school names, it says math or reading, whichever one they were visited for. And you can expect to see more very, very soon. I'm also going to work on getting you links to the CTE ERT visit reports. And right now, they have completed, I believe I just heard 11 CTE visits to 11 counties. And those reports, this is the first year, and it's taken a little while to finalize what a report would look like, but they are beginning to get them finalized. And as soon as we get those, we'll pass those to you as well. So with that, those were kind of the biggest things I thought that were pertaining to Pillar 5. And then one big update, AIB is hiring. We've got 4 more positions remaining. We're hiring policy analysts for Pillars 1, 3, and 5, and a fiscal analyst as well. And so if you know of anybody interested, that's on our website. And if you just go to our homepage, aib.maryland.gov, there's like a carousel that cycles through things. And one of those you can click on and it'll take you to the jobs page. But with that, I don't want to overtake the meeting with too many updates. Are there any other questions that I could answer or any other updates that you were looking for? All right. I think I've done my job.
Nope. Thank you, Rachel.
All right, thanks.
Emma, so Emma has a wonderful presentation coming up next. I want to ask you first, Emma, do you prefer questions, like do your presentation, questions for the end, or?
I think, either way could work. It could be helpful just to, kind of split it up a little bit. So the first part will be focused on the interim evaluation. It's just a few slides, and then maybe we can pause for questions at the end of that. And then the next part is focused on the history of the outcome measures work group and next steps for outcome measures. And so we could take questions pertaining to that at the end. And then if there's things that folks want to cycle back to from the beginning, we can always do that as well. Does that work?
Oh, yeah, no, sounds good. Floor is yours.
Okay, sounds good. Great. Thank you all again for having me here today to talk with you a little bit about the interim evaluation and outcome measures. And I have a presentation that I'll just be sharing my screen for here. 1 second. So for this first part, we are focusing on the interim evaluation that is required by the Blueprint law. And I'll start off with just a quick overview, kind of differentiating between overall evaluation of the blueprint, and then distinguishing that between the focus of evaluating the blueprint overall and evaluating the requirements of the blueprint interim evaluation, because they're connected. And that's why we have a visual where you see this outer circle that encompasses the larger evaluation framework for determining blueprint progress and assessing impact, and potentially any changes that need to be made to it over time, versus the very specific focus of the interim evaluation, which is again part of this larger framework, but has some very specific things that need to be addressed based off of what's in statute. So this might be a little bit hard to read. I'm not a graphic designer, but I wanted to do my best here to show the relationship between the two. So this outer circle again represents the overall evaluation framework as we are evaluating the blueprint's impact. And that encompasses things like developing and utilizing logic models that capture the blueprint theory of change, which in our work over the last couple of years, we've shown different iterations of logic models, and those are visuals that represent the that show the relationships and represent the overall impact that the blueprint should have, and how these, based off of how it was created, and how these different inputs, outputs, activities, actors who are involved in blueprint implementation connect to one another, and how that will ultimately lead to long-term outcomes, and particularly for specifically for students in Maryland. So you may have seen different iterations of that over the last couple of years. They're also linked in the request for proposal that was shared with the evaluators. And I know that those materials were shared with you as well. As part of this, we also have developed overall outcome measures aligned with the blueprint's expected outcomes and are using them to assess implementation progress. We are reviewing, approving, and monitoring progress of state and local agencies' blueprint implementation plans, assessing the expected versus the actual impact of blueprint policies on student outcomes. And then, as needed and as appropriate, and as the AIB has said repeatedly, we are considering and recommending legislative changes to improve blueprint implementation that are grounded in evidence. So really, this framework is also helping to identify what that evidence might be and elevating that evidence as needed if a change may need to be made. But again, this is just when there is evidence to move this forward. The specific interim evaluation that's required by the blueprint law, it takes place more or less over the course of 2 years. And it requires consideration of blueprint implementation progress through the 25-26 school year. So the actual evaluation activities take place through this fiscal year and next fiscal year. And then it's looking at blueprint implementation progress since the beginning of the blueprint's implementation. And it's looking specifically at the use of additional funding to meet the blueprint's goals, progress towards the blueprint's goals and whether they have been achieved, and recommendations to alter the goals or strategies employed to reach them. This is again identified in the request for proposal that you all have access to, and that was sent to proposers for the interim evaluation and is reflective of what's in the law. So that takes us to more specifics around the blueprint evaluation, the interim evaluation. Like I said, the blueprint law requires the AIB to contract with the public or private entity to conduct an interim and independent evaluation of the state's progress in implementing the blueprint and achieving the expected interim outcomes. Some other components that are will be part of this report that's resulting from the interim evaluation is progress on increasing the number of teachers achieving national board certification, providing full-day pre-K programs for 3- and 4-year-olds, improving behavioral health services, and ensuring that students enrolled in public schools demonstrate college and career readiness. So this is a timeline for when the interim evaluation is going to be conducted, and we're trying to break it down between now and the beginning of fiscal year, calendar year 2027. So the evaluation contract was awarded on January 30th. So that just shows the start date here for January 30th, 2025 at our public meeting. And we'll talk more about the awardee in the next slide. Right now, the AIB and the awardee, NORC at the University of Chicago, we are working together to create an evaluation plan. So that is the focus for the next couple of months. And that upon the completion of the evaluation plan, that's when the evaluation will start, the actual evaluation activities. So that will start probably, I think it's around the June, July. And actually it's going to take place all through, almost all the way through 2026, through the rest of 2025, and then until about the summer of 2026. At that point, the NORC will be presenting a draft report of their findings to the AIB, and AIB will be providing feedback as needed in the fall of 2026 until a final report is presented to the AIB in December of 2026. And then AIB will report on those findings to the Governor and General Assembly in January of 2027. Again, all of these dates are reflective of what's in the request for proposal, as well as what's in blueprint law. And just during this time, and this is noted here, the contractor, in this case, NORC, we'll talk more about them in a second, shall conduct at least 4 public presentations at the request of the AIB during the contract period. So that's at least 4 public presentations. There's also specific presentations that they'll be making to the General Assembly with their findings once the final report is written. So as I mentioned earlier, the evaluation award was made at the January 30th, 2025 public meeting. We read through several proposals that were sent to the AIB for consideration in late 2024. And following our review of the submitted proposals and interviews with each of the teams that submitted a proposal, AIB staff recommended NORC at the University of Chicago as the awardee of the contract in the amount of $766,790. This decision was based on NORC's approach to the evaluation, their expertise in systems change evaluation in particular. They're a real leader in that field. Their capacity to perform within the specified timeframe, as well as their efficient and effective delivery of services in a manner that is most advantageous to AIB as reflected in the proposal. So that award was made and approved by the board on January 30th. So we are now working with NORC to co-create this evaluation plan and moving forward with the evaluation. And right now, we don't have a ton of other updates besides that about the evaluation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that I can today. And as there are more updates that are available based off of findings or just based off of, what activities have been completed, we'd be happy to share those with you. So at this time, I'll just take any questions that any folks have about the interim evaluation.
Hey, Emma, I'll kick it off with a question. So I know you said the interim evaluation report covers was it 4 different categories? Teachers achieving MBC, the amount of full day pre-K programs, behavioral health services, and students enrolled in public schools demonstrating CCR. Is that correct?
That is part of what is going to be part of the evaluation.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily the full extent of it, but those are the key measures that have to be part of the report.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess my question off of that, can you speak more, or do you know more about, in terms of presenting the data, how they ensure, I guess when that information is being presented, is there any sort of disaggregation done with that data? For example, national board teachers at high need school versus not high need school, or within districts, what's equity with behavioral health service being provided, or where are pre-K programs being provided within district? Can you speak to, I guess, that whole topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the evaluation data and what's going to be presented, we just overall in terms of data presentation, the AIB through the outcome measures work group is committed to disaggregating data to the greatest extent possible. That includes student outcome data as well as teachers, data related to teachers. So that is a commitment that the outcome measures work group made and that the AIB made in determining outcome measures related to Blueprint progress monitoring overall. In terms of the way that data will be presented as part of this evaluation, we haven't gotten to the specifics of that yet, but knowing that data disaggregation is important and something that has been highlighted and emphasized by the AIB before as a priority, that will also be done as part of this evaluation. But in terms of presenting the data, when the data is going to be presented, all those things in terms of the timeline, that's hasn't been finalized yet as part of the evaluation plan, since that's still being written.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Javon's question is really critical, and I'm wondering if plans for disaggregating the data were built into the proposal that NORC produced.
I can, if you'd like to, we can go back and look at specific. Well, when we have the evaluation plan available, and then also, when NORC is making presentations about its findings, we can follow up with them about how the data is disaggregated.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And you're right, that is a really key consideration. Any other questions related to the interim evaluation? We can always go back to this later.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Chung. One question I have is, will they be looking at all at, they can only look at data that exists, meaning if they're looking at student outcome data for the college and career readiness, they're looking at the assessments that have been given. Will they provide any sort of qualitative analysis as to whether or not those assessments need to be reconsidered? A lot of what I hear sometimes is that, and I don't know, there's sort of a black box around the assessments, but that whether or not they're, are the right ones, whether they are actually targeting, finding the information that we need to find, is that part of the scope of what they might look at? And comparing to other states, what they might be doing?
That's a really good question. I think that Member Stapleton might be able to speak more towards considerations around assessments moving forward. And in terms of the scope of this evaluation, I don't think that would be part of the scope of this evaluation. Rachel, is Member Stapleton joining today? Because I think that was something she was going to talk about, but I'm not sure.
I think that she is planning to. I know that she is in transit right now.
Okay. Sorry. I wasn't sure if she was had joined or not yet, but that is a very good question. And I think that would be outside of the scope of this particular evaluation, but the evaluation plan is still being written. But I don't think that was something that was identified in statute as a focus of the evaluation for the blueprint.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we can go on to the next part of the presentation on outcome measures work group and outcome measures in general. Okay, so let me go back to the slide. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the development of outcome measures by AIB, and as well as their correlation with outcome measures that have been identified by the governor, as well as our outcome measures metrics, key performance indicators. They're all called different things across these plans, but how those compare to what was identified by the governor in his state plan as well as the State Department of Education, and working together to align those. So first I'll start with the outcome measures work group that goes all the way back to the beginning of 2023, when the outcome measures work group formed to identify and recommend outcome measures to include an updated version of the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. So this work group operated in an advisory capacity to the AIB. Ultimately, the AIB did adopt or did not adopt those recommendations as part of the updated Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. But their main goal was to, or purpose was to review outcome measures that had already been identified in the initial Blueprint Comprehensive Plan that was adopted in December 2022, and recommend refinements to these measures as needed. To identify appropriate metrics and data sources to be used for these measures, and assess baseline data and propose targets for any identified metrics. The workgroup membership and timeline. The workgroup was chaired by AIB members Laura Stapleton and Joe Manco, and included representatives of LEAs, state agencies, advocates, subject matter and data experts, as well as the AIB's equity consultants, Dr. Ivory Tolson and Dr. Natasha McClendon. The work group held 10 public meetings from February through July of 2023. And if you can watch all of them at your leisure, if you'd like to, they're still posted on the AIB website. But basically each meeting focused on a particular set of measures aligned with a specific pillar. We went through each pillar, I think, at least twice to think about what measures are currently in existence for those or had been identified for those pillars, whether they needed to be refined, and if any additional measures needed to be identified to ensure that we were looking at all potential leading indicators of progress related to Blueprint implementation, and really looking at what progress was being made for each of these indicators, and setting appropriate targets as needed. And the work group ultimately came up with about 60 plus recommendations for outcome measures to recommend to the AIB, and we'll get to that in a second. And following the adoption of the updated outcome measures, the work group continued to meet on an ad hoc basis through 2023 and 2024. For example, when a set of targets had actually been suggested and proposed, they took a look at those suggestions and provided their own feedback before those targets were shared with the AIB and with the State Board of Education as well, to provide input. I'll quickly touch on the types of measures that the work group really tried to differentiate between. That includes output measures and outcome measures. So you'll see that referred to in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan if you would like to see, take a look at all of those that were incorporated. Outputs generally are measures that do not confirm that a change has taken place. So when you're thinking about the theory of change with the Blueprint, you'll see some measures that don't necessarily confirm that there's been a change in a student or teacher's behavior or actions or knowledge, but they are serving as key indicators that a change may be taking place based on a program's progress towards implementation. And these are usually conveyed through numbers, such as number of teachers who have been trained in a particular program or under a particular professional development series, the number of students being served by a tutoring program. If you see the number of students who are being served by these programs increase, and if the theory is that participating in this particular initiative will help student outcomes overall, then it means that the number of students participating and an increase in the number of students participating will potentially lead to improved student outcomes as a result of participating in that particular initiative or program. That contrasts a little bit with outcome measures, which convey a program's impact on participants as demonstrated through a change in their knowledge, behavior, or beliefs, or it could be all three. So an outcome measure would be looking at, what changes are we seeing in terms of student outcomes on a particular assessment, or in terms of grades, or in terms of chronic absenteeism, or any number of things as a result of participating or being supported through a particular initiative or program or strategy. Other things that you'll also see in the comprehensive plan, we tried to uplift measures that were really integrated into the Blueprint law already. These are things that were aligned with targets that were already integrated into the Blueprint. Those could be, and we refer to those as legislative requirements. And some of those were really implicit in terms of the Blueprint and what's in statute, the target being 100%. We want all students to achieve this. For instance, with increased pre-K enrollment and ensuring that all tier 1 4-year-olds or children, 4-year-old children from tier 1 households are able to access pre-K. That target was really embedded into the Blueprint already, and that is a target of 100%. So we tried to uplift those ones that were already in the Blueprint and the way that the Blueprint was written by referring to them as legislative requirements. So you'll also see that term in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, and that's what we were really trying to identify how many are already really integrated into the Blueprint law without even needing to be identified by the work group. And this visual helps to it represents the thinking of how these different output and outcome measures were developed. So you have this overall Blueprint outcome at the very top to represent the overarching vision for the Blueprint and what all of the work and initiatives and strategies that are encompassed within the 5 pillars are supposed to be leading to. And that is that all Maryland students leave high school globally competitive and prepared for success in post-secondary education, work, and life. And then we have Blueprint level outcome measures, again, that are available in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan that are supposed to help all together to contribute to this overall outcome for the Blueprint and for Maryland students. There's also pillar level outcome measures that if we see that there's progress at the pillar level and we're reaching those expected outcomes for each pillar, whether it's expanding pre-K, ensuring that we have a more a larger and more diverse educator workforce, ensuring that more students are reaching the college and career readiness standard, ensuring that all students are getting the resources that they need to be successful, ensuring that there's effective governance and accountability of reaching Blueprint expected outcomes. If all of these expected outcomes at the pillar levels work together, then we should be able to reach this overall Blueprint outcome of all Maryland students leaving high school globally competitive and prepared for success in post-secondary education, work, and life. So these outcome measures are supposed to be looking at, are we actually reaching the outcomes that we've identified for each pillar? And then if those are being reached, hopefully we are reaching the overall Blueprint outcomes that the Blueprint theorized when it was being created. You'll also see, going back to what we talked about earlier, this is an image that's taken directly from the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, and it affirms our discussion earlier about disaggregating data to the greatest extent possible. So this is something that we've, the AIB continued to uplift and is committed to for reporting all data moving forward. So just wanted to highlight this as well. So this actually, I'm going to pause really quickly here because then we're kind of getting into a different phase of outcome measures. So I'm not quite done with the presentation yet, but does anybody have any questions about what I've discussed and shared so far around the Blueprint outcome measures? I can, if you have questions that come up at the end, we can go back to them. So there's just a few more slides on alignment of these metrics. So as we said, we had about 60 measures that were identified by the AIB as part of the updated Blueprint Comprehensive Plan for 2023. And then we also had plans, the Moore-Miller State Plan that was put out a little bit later, as well as the Maryland Transformed Strategic Plan published by the State Department of Education. These all came out roughly the same year and had, as we realized, overlapping metrics between all three plans that were similar, but not exactly the same, but we're looking at very similar areas of assessing Blueprint progress. So we saw aligned metrics between these three plans, the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, the Moore-Miller State Plan, as well as the Maryland Transformed Strategic Plan, in 7 different areas related to early childhood education, literacy, college and career readiness, workforce diversity and retention, the career ladder, chronic absenteeism, and student support personnel. Obviously, knowing that these metrics were so closely related, but not exactly the same, there was a focus on, well, what can we do? How can we possibly align these metrics so that we don't have different metrics that are mostly looking at the same thing, but instead, how can we align these metrics so they're looking at exactly the same thing, and we don't have different entities looking at different metrics across the state to assess the same initiatives and programs. So MSD and AIB staff formed a working group to specifically align the overlapping metrics from the 3 state plans and develop implementation targets for the State Board of Education and AIB members to consider for adoption. We solicited feedback on the proposed metrics and targets from standing committees and work groups and members of the public. As I shared earlier, the Outcome Measures Work Group met in, I think it was May of 2024, to look at these targets and provide feedback. And this feedback could also be shared over email or through a Google form posted on the AIB website. So we looked for feedback in multiple ways. As I said, there were about 7 areas that overlapped, and some of these areas had baseline data available at the time that we could use then to set or propose targets for the board's consideration. So these targets are available on the AIB website. There's a 1-pager that summarizes the aligned metrics, and it also shows the targets that were ultimately agreed upon by both boards. The first one area is around literacy. You'll see this language really reflected in the metric related to math achievement as well. This first one is focused on the percent of grade 3 students scoring at or above proficient on the grade 3 ELA assessment, with the baseline starting in 2023-24 school year. And we have 2 targets here that collectively add up to a 10% increase over the following academic years, ultimately with a target of 56% statewide in 2025-2026. This is the same thing, but with different baseline data for the percent of grades 3 through 8 students collectively scoring at or above proficient on the ELA assessment. So we're looking at this grade band of grade 3 through 8 students. Overall, how many, and increasing that by 10% over the course of the, from 2023 to 24 through 2025 to 26. This language is very similar with the math assessment and math achievement. Again, with obviously different baseline data and different targets, but looking at that same increase of 10% between these years. We also, the boards adopted targets related to the rate of chronic absenteeism in all schools, with the baseline starting in 2022-23 school year at 30% rate of chronic absenteeism statewide, and with a target of decreasing this by half by the end of the 2025-26 school year to 15%. For the workforce, we also had targets related to workforce diversity and workforce retention. Two measures were agreed upon and were aligned between the three plans. Looking at the percent of new teachers of color as measured by the fall staff collection report, with baseline data starting at 46% and a target of 55% for the 2026-27 school year. And the percent of teachers of color retained over a three-year period, starting at 70% in the 23-24 school year, and a target of 78% in the 26-27 school year. The measures related to workforce retention look at the percent of teachers retained over a three-year period and the percent of new teachers retained over a three-year period specifically. So looking at the group overall, and then specifically looking at the percent of new teachers retained in the same time frame. So this last piece here is around monitoring progress to targets and just talking about next steps related to that once these targets were agreed upon. Progress towards meeting targets will be monitored at both the state and local levels and by student group. So again, going back to what was discussed earlier about the importance of disaggregating data as much as possible. That will happen throughout the progress monitoring process and monitoring progress of blueprint implementation. So you saw the statewide targets that had been agreed upon by AIB and the State Board of Education. LEA level targets for these metrics reflect the interval increases established at the state level. So basically, if there was a 10% increase at the state level, that was set by the board, by both boards, then the LEA, at the LEA level, each LEA is expected to also increase their own relative scores by that same amount. So for example, each LEA will aim to increase their math and reading proficiency scores from the 2024-25 school year by 5 percentage points in this in one school year, since that was the goal at the state level. And you'll recall that there was 2 sets of targets there for the math and ELA proficiency targets. There was for the 2024-25 school year and 25-26 with an overall increase of 10%, but between those 2 school years, an increase by 5%. Each LEA is then responsible for setting implementation outcome targets aligned with these metrics at the school level. So the LEAs will have targets that are already set by, because they're supposed to reflect what's happening at the state level. And then the LEAs themselves determine which targets they are meeting at the school level. Or determine the targets at the school level that will be aligned with this overall LEA level target. There are some additional metrics. I won't read all of these, but just wanted to highlight some of the additional ones that were either part of the aligned metrics that were identified by the AIB and State Board of Education, or a part of the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. So the ones that are in bold here are part of the aligned metrics between AIB and the State Board of Education, but do not have a target set yet. That's because of a lack of available baseline data through which a target can be set. And as that baseline data becomes available, we will be working on proposing more targets to bring to both boards for their consideration aligned with those measures. So just an example here, the percentage of kindergarten students demonstrating readiness on a kindergarten readiness assessment, knowing that the KRA was being revised and a new KRA was being developed, it did not make sense to use the baseline data from the old KRA to set a target. So no target has been set there yet, but this is an aligned metric between the 3 state plans. I won't read through all of them. You can take, so if you'd just like to take a look at these as we go through, they're also available in the comprehensive plan that's on the website, if you'd like to take a look at that. Again, the ones that are in bold reflect aligned metrics between AIB and State Board of Education, related to the career ladder, related to the percent of Maryland students who meet the CCR standard by 10th grade or by high school graduation, as well as those who have completed a post-CCR pathway. And then specific measures for pillars 4 and 5, reflecting pillar-specific activities and expected outcomes. And moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, the AIB and the evaluation team from NORC at the University of Chicago are co-creating the evaluation plan. AIB and MSDE staff will work together to propose targets for aligned metrics between our respective plans for the joint board's consideration and adoption. And the AIB will continue to monitor state and local agency progress in implementing their respective blueprint plans overall. In terms of what that progress monitoring will look like, we will have more information in the future regarding specific activities and what that will look like, and are happy to share that as that information becomes available and more specifics can be shared with you all. So this is what we have to share today. Happy to answer any questions that you all have. And if there's something that I can't answer today, I promise to provide a response as soon as possible.
Oh yeah, Emma, there's a chat from Evelyn. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, sure. Because the secondary math is going to start changing. How's like if we're trying to track the progress, how is that going to be accounted for? Like I imagine the MCAPs will change, a lot will change as they go to integrated math.
A good question. I think that's something we are, as new data becomes available and we're seeing what the progress looks like towards the targets that have been previously set. That will continue to be shared with both boards, and we can provide more information if there's anything that comes up with how that might be impacted.
Emma, question. This is just out of curiosity. I know when you talked about I guess the literacy math metrics for baseline data and then the goals. Can you speak more on how it was determined exactly how it was like 5 percentage points growth like per year, especially because I do know literacy, I think had like in the 40s% as baselines, and then math was 20% as the baselines. Can you just speak more on how I guess those numbers specifically were determined for growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it could also be helpful to take a look at the board meetings that were live streamed, the joint board meetings from June and August of 2024, because you'll see that some preliminary targets were adopted by both boards prior to the MCAP data from the previous school year being released. And so then there was reconsideration of what the targets should be for math and ELA following the release of the MCAP data from the 2023 to 24 school year. So new targets were actually set. And it might be helpful to actually look back at that June and then August board meeting and those discussion points to learn a little bit more about the board's thinking and what they ultimately decided on, because that meeting, really does capture their thought process around how they came to update the targets once the MCAP data was released. But that was something that the boards both adopted at those joint meetings. Thank you, Rachel. I think, yeah, appreciate that. I think she just dropped a link in there to those meetings.
Is there any thought at all about qualitative data as part of these evaluations?
In terms of what's going to be integrated into the evaluation plan, definitely. That is something that will be part of the evaluation, and we can share more about that once the evaluation plan has been developed, but definitely a consideration for the evaluation and just overall in terms of that's for the interim evaluation as well as overall what did LEAs describe in their implementation plans? What are common themes in terms of what we're seeing with regards to implementation, and how is that impacting, if at all, the quantitative outcomes that are we're seeing with regards to students and student achievement. Any other questions? I think I might be over my allotted time, but happy to answer more questions if anybody has any.
Can I actually, was it fine if I pose a question to the group? Yeah, so I don't know, just for me personally, I'm just sitting through this presentation. I'm just thinking about how this impacts me as a teacher, and I was really curious to how this impacts all of you guys in your roles, because we have roles from literally everywhere within the education sphere. So I was just thinking for myself, like the goal of now increasing the number of national board certified teachers from the state. I know in our district, we've done a wonderful job of providing those supports for teachers such as myself who are able to achieve national board. And that's the one metric I was just thinking of. I'm just curious, I wanted to ask like the rest of the committee, how do you guys see everything in this presentation or some parts of the presentation showing up in your roles and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So from a strictly budgetary standpoint, when you think about national board and the $10,000 just for achieving it, it's a pretty significant cost at the teacher level. The other thing is that in the recent past, it used to be a 10-year recertification, and they changed it to a 5-year recertification. So that creates that impact for the MOC requirements, and that's been a sticking point within our negotiations. So from just strictly a budgetary impact, the other thing I wonder as we've been thinking about this is the NBC. The data seems to be mixed on efficacy in the classroom when it comes to that. And there are other certifications that are available. So I wonder, it seems like this is really focused at, are we achieving a goal, but will they start measuring the efficacy? And I know that it would be difficult to create a control group because, with NBC teachers versus non-NBC teachers and where they're teaching and all of those various things in that. But I know that, and it's certainly not my expertise when it comes to this, but I know that it's a question our board has asked quite a bit. Because it does have such a huge financial impact. Is it really the bang for the buck when you're in such times where you have such a limited amount of funds? And so that's one of the questions. I appreciate that what they're looking for in this, but when do you, for just down and dirty, what's your ROI? What's your return on investment for these type of things? And I would imagine that comes a little later in this analysis, but I think we have to get to that point because I think it's really going to help boards buy into it.
I can add to that just a little bit that I've recently become aware that some local counties are beginning to do their own research on national board. And so I'll be interested to see as that's coming out, what they are finding with that. But I think, Heather, you bring up a really good point. Like, that's why this interim evaluation is so important. We need to see if we're achieving the goals that we've been tasked. So hopefully there'll be more research coming out, and then the interim evaluation will help us with that as well.
Yeah, no, Heather, thank you so much for sharing that, especially hearing that from your perspective. We'd love to hear any more other perspectives if there are. We have a lot of different people here. Would love to hear different thoughts.
I've heard the same thing, and I admit I'm not as in tune of understanding the mechanics of it because I didn't think that the board certification was required, but I've heard that it's been an obstacle to filling like to staffing, that it's slowed the ability to staff up. And I don't know exactly how it is maybe because of the incentives. So learning a little bit more about that would be helpful, and especially in special ed. And then I think to right now, the focus in our county for special ed has been actually to get more hiring for the paras to create better work and environment of support so that we can actually bring in and recruit the special ed teachers. But there's a huge shortage across the board in our county, and I'm sure that other LEAs are experiencing that as well. I think that this information is helpful for us in terms of like as a parent advocate, for the parents and guardians to better understand where our LEA stands, and the target information. Sometimes it's the Maryland Blueprint and the Maryland Report Card and the data that comes out of the state is the only objective data that we get, or it's the data that we get earliest. I think there's some questions about that data, about the assessments and what they're actually measuring, but so it's useful for us as community advocates to see where we're doing and how we stand compared to the other LEAs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just coming from a principal's perspective. So, I think that probably the thing that probably has a greater impact, that's probably, somewhat of a caveat from this is, you want your best teachers in front of your most neediest students. I mean, that's just cut and dry what you want. I don't know how we're going to measure if LEAs are doing that, because that leads into a whole nother can of worms that starts to now become political when you start to changing the demographics of schools or pulling teachers from affluent schools to schools that are more needy, just to make sure that they have the best teachers. It poses some issues and some problems. We already know that the budgets of majority of the school district depends on what county you're from, the political structures of that county, and how county executives and so forth are going to help and fund public education. That's already been an issue so far, because now that is now a political issue. So I see that there are a lot of concerns. I think there are a lot of areas in which, yes, it should work. But when you have people that are moving to different counties, the number one reason why they're moving to those counties, especially if they have a family, is to have their kids go to a certain public school. When you start messing around with that, people start to get very upset, and it starts to change things. So I think LEAs probably want to do the right things, but it's very difficult when you're a superintendent of a county, like I'm Howard County, and you're saying, okay, well, we want to make sure that things are kind of spread out, that we just don't have one or two or maybe 5 schools that have the most neediest students. We're going to spread things out and make sure everybody is getting the best teachers, best instruction, and so forth. And, parents and everybody else get in an uproar, and then things don't happen because of that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see. And I don't know how AIB is going to help, evaluate that or help to support those things. But that is going to be probably the biggest thing moving forward in the next couple of years.
On the budget aspect and sort of also the data, I think we've talked about locally how helpful it is to also disaggregate based on percentages of students who are English learning, who are on special ed in a school, and then to think about funding as like less of a cliff, because often we have schools that have just met the Title I status and they get funding, but then there are schools that are just miss that status, and then is it just a cliff then in terms of their funding, but they have high needs because they have, and so I think some sort of data kind of seeing what happens at different groups could be also helpful to see, well, is there something going on, right? If you're just missing the Title I funding status, but they also need a lot of funding too and support,
It's a really good suggestion, and definitely a lens we should be thinking about. Yeah, I don't think that there are any more questions for my part of this evening's presentation, but I'm happy to stay on if anybody has anything else that they'd like to share. And if not, if you'd like to connect after today or have anything you'd like to raise, please feel free to reach out.
Emma, thanks for joining tonight and for sharing such a comprehensive update. I know we keep joking on this pillar that it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot to take in from all of the different aspects of Pillar 5, but this is something that's very timely. It's like happening right now. Plus, you just got the behind the scenes of what's been happening to lead up to this work. But we really appreciate that. I didn't catch any questions that we weren't able to get an answer to today. Usually we do have some that I need to go do some digging or get back to you on. Did I miss any? Were there any questions that we need to follow up with? Did everybody get their questions answered?
I don't think so. I think that the key part is really just there were some questions about the evaluation plan and the evaluation approach,
Okay.
which we just won't be able to answer until the evaluation plan has been developed and finalized. So I guess to that extent, but happy
Yep.
to share more later.
What we've found with our first 3 topics now is that it seems like we just need to put them on auto rotation and come back to this in 6 months or whenever it feels right to get another update. Same with ERT, same with the fiscal meeting that we did back in January. But it's a lot of information to take in, and a lot of great work is happening around the blueprint. And now we're really able to roll up our sleeves and see the impacts of the work. So many thanks for sharing that with everybody tonight. Mr. Luz, I'll turn it back over to you.
Also, welcome, Dr. Stapleton. I saw that you joined just now. Was there anything else you want to add? I'm not sure how much you have to catch earlier on, but was there anything else that you'd like to add?
I didn't catch enough to know what was said or what wasn't said, so I won't add anything. But I do know that, and I apologize for not getting the planning email earlier, but that you had hoped for maybe a summary of the MSDE's Accountability and Assessment Task Force work. So I can talk a little bit about that and what my role was on that and what the goals of that group were. It's really MSDE's task force, so I don't want to be taken as speaking for them, but my impression was that so the superintendent, Carrie Wright, was concerned to some extent that the Maryland Report Card, the STAR system, was potentially not adequately representing the strengths or relative non-strengths of certain schools. And so she wanted to take a deep dive into the components that go into that STAR rating and to evaluate if they were the right components or not, or what tweaks needed to be made. And as part of that conversation, there was also a discussion of the actual assessment itself, the MCAP. And so our group, it was facilitated by the Center for Assessment. So they had a contract with the Center for Assessment to facilitate this group. It involved folks from similar to this group. We had folks who were in assessment offices and LEAs. We had superintendents, we had principals, we had folks from the special education community, multilingual multi-language learner community. And so a bunch of folks around the room. We met monthly from sometimes twice a month from I think April last year through November-ish. And the goal was to put to have all of the pieces discussed so that the MSDE could put out a call for the development of a new assessment, which they have done. I think the deadline is next week for proposals to be submitted. And also to, I think, just have fully fleshed out kind of ideas about the report card. I think one of the really important points of the report card that was discussed was how you measure or quantify growth, because student growth percentiles was a big component within the report card. And there's a couple different ways to measure. I don't know what MSDE is going to use in the end. The group was pretty split on two options. But the current report card, it's hard to explain this, but the metric that is being used kind of ranges from about 40 to 60. And so the points that schools would get would go from 40 to 60 on that, which is so it's actually kind of a small range when a school that's at a 40 is actually not doing a good job at all, and a school that's at the 60 is doing amazing. And so the way that metric was being used was not differentiating the schools. So they heard that, and they're going to work on using that measure a little bit more wisely. But as I think, did somebody, maybe I saw the wrong, oh no, I saw a link thrown in there, but somebody, I don't know if Rachel, if you can find the link to the RFP for the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program.
I will look at that.
Right now, it's a adaptive test. So every time a student gets a question and they get it right, they're moved on to materials that might be a little bit more challenging. And if they get it wrong, they're moved on to items that might be less challenging for them. It's good way to quickly figure out where somebody is on a continuum of knowledge with relatively few items. But the goal is to switch to what's called a multi-stage adaptive test, which is all the kids get exactly the same test for the first half. And then based on their performance on that first half, they're then moved to an adaptive test, a different level. And if you get put in the high level, it's possible that you can do so poorly that you get back down. Or if you get in the lower level, it's possible you do so well, you get moved, you get a high score. So it's not determinant of your final score in the end. But that's one of the big changes in the planned assessment. So those are some of the issues that we talked about in that accountability group. The Center for Assessment, I think, did a fabulous job in facilitating. I hadn't worked with them before, but they were very good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Stapleton. And also my apologies. Sorry, I'd used the wrong email to reach out.
No, one would think if you use the AIB email, I would get it, but I'm horrible at because you can't forward the email from the Maryland.gov thing. It's really difficult to log in.
It's not easy. It's just not easy. Yes.
Awesome.
But actually, that was very, very helpful information. So thank you for sharing that. I did drop a link to the public website for the Assessment and Accountability Task Force, which lives on the MSDE website, and it includes meeting summaries as well as the PowerPoints and meeting materials from each meeting and their final document. There's a lot of great information in there.
Yeah, it was really interesting work. Evelyn?
Hi, thank you for the update. So I'm actually on our district's assessments committee as well. And one of the big takeaways is I'm wondering if you have done sort of a collection of what LEAs are currently using outside of the state assessments.
Oh yeah, that was discussed about, who was using what interim assessments and whether any formative assessments were being used. And it was split, I can't remember the names of them now, but it's split half and half basically between, you can probably name them and I'll say, yes, that's that one.
Well, yeah, because what we're experiencing is as we are trying to, especially in literacy, roll out science of reading and high quality instructional materials. You know, the research is showing the importance of curriculum aligned assessments, right? That like as you're learning things and shifting how we do assessments in literacy. So we've incorporated DIBELS, but also reading comprehension. We've adopted CKLA, and you know, how they test reading comprehension is different. However, the number of assessments in the curriculum is a lot. So teachers are feeling like there's a lot of assessments. We're figuring out how to avoid exceeding the 2% max. And then the question comes about what happens with, they also do MAP scores, which are very popular, but they're not necessarily standards aligned or aligned to like our state standards. But the benefits from the, you know, parents and teachers, what I've heard is, you know, it shows growth, which it sounds like your task force is looking into. And also folks feel like they want to see how we compare nationally, their student compares nationally, and they're they feel the students are motivated by it. But the result is the students are also getting tested a lot. And one of the downsides of some of the downsides is that there's a lot of time taken for state testing, but that those scores don't get to students. The teachers don't feel like they get information that's really useful and can inform instruction. And, you know, at least in our LEA, I'm just going to say it, like sometimes we don't get our reports like until a year later. And I know the deadline is 30 days, but that's not happening in our LEA. And if it does, even when you get the report, it doesn't tell us, like a parent doesn't feel like it's useful information in the same way that a map does. And I understand from experts, we have some assessment experts that even the map is not necessarily the information we think it is. But I'm just wondering, I think the elephant in the room as we're talking about our LEA's assessment is, well, we have no control over the state assessments, but that's a big chunk of time being used. And that's the one that's, you know, showing up everywhere. And there's a whole lot of like insight into, I think there's, you know, confusion about like, well, kids are taking the algebra MCAP and it doesn't seem to align with what they're learning in the classroom. And maybe it's a classroom issue, but maybe it's a test issue. And which is it? So I'm wondering, like, is that coming up? I would love to.
Yeah, it was coming up.
There was
a long discussion or repeated discussions over meetings about the timeliness of information and the you know, who is the client here really? Are you trying to use these data to just evaluate schools? Are you trying to provide it to the teachers for formative? Are you trying to provide information to parents? And so I'm not sure where they landed entirely, except to say, and by the way, yes, Rachel, iReady was one of them and MAP was the other. So WEA's MAP was, so it was like half and half split, because we were wondering with, you know, should the state be providing resources to the district to support those interim assessments?
Yeah.
But given that it was half and half, they thought, well, it's not going to work. But and we did have folks who like yourself kind of represented the LEA's perspective. But what they ended up putting in the proposal, the RFA, was asking for folks who are applying to create this assessment program to potentially include interim and formative assessments that would align with the state assessment. So what the goal would be to offer it as an optional test for a district. If you want to use the interim assessment that aligns with the full MCAP, here it is for you, or you can go ahead and keep using iReady or MAP like what you're doing now. So that is a proposal. There are optional components in the RFA. So when the companies or whoever it is applying applies, they can, or some may not. So it's not clear, you know, but when they decide who to give the contract to, whether that will be part of it or not.
Yeah, that's great, because I know our LEA ended up working with MSTE, so because there was a real call by the teachers and students to have interim checks that, you know, so that kids would be familiar with what might be on the test later. The other big thing is going to be the math change at the secondary level, and I think if a state sponsored solution would be really helpful, because it's not, I mean, the new integrated math that Maryland is rolling out is not going to be like any other state. I mean, a 2-year integrated math sequence is just completely new. So there's not going to be anything commercially available. And I think the last thing we want is LEAs to start coming up with things on their own and, you know, without insight from what the vision is at the, state level. So if that could even be integrated and sort of done through an RFP for all the LEAs to be able to use, I think that would be a huge step towards consistent implementation.
Yeah, I don't remember that coming up in our conversations, but we also didn't talk a lot at the actual content level about anything really.
Awesome. Thank you all. We did have a few minutes left. I just wanted to jump to our last steps before we close out at 7:30. I just want to respect everyone's time, but thank you everyone so much. So, next up, our next meeting is Monday, May 12th, and what we need to do right now is pick a topic we want to do. I'm linking the advisory committee key topics right now in the chat. If you guys are all able to open that up, that'd be great. So there's topics 1 through 7, and what I'm asking right now is for every advisory committee member to put a number between 1 and 7 in the chat based off of what topic you would like to do next. We're just gonna go by majority rule here. I know we've done number 1, which is some funding. We've done 7, evaluation of blueprint initiatives. But type in a number 1 through 7 based on what your personal interest is in.
And Mr. Liu, while everybody's doing that, I just want to mention one thing, maybe for conversation tonight or maybe for conversation at the next meeting. It is up to each advisory committee if they want to continue to meet summer or if they meet in June but not July or whatever they want to do. So that might be a good conversation to add on or for folks to think about and then come back to talk about in May. What vacation schedules look like and if you want to meet every month or just during the school year.
We'll for sure bring it up at our next meeting that in May to discuss.
Perfect.
All right, I'm seeing 2 4s, 3 4s, 2 6s, a 3 currently. I'm gonna jot these all down, by the way, even in case we don't necessarily. All right. Looking right now, it's overwhelming majority 4 right now. So we are going to take that topic for May, which is, 4 is teacher and school leader accountability. And I'll send out a follow-up email to the whole committee. I know there's some people that signed up as interested in that bucket, but sounds like there's a lot of people interested. So we're going to I'm going to invite you guys to our planning session. And hopefully, if you guys want to help co-design the session on what our next session will look like on Monday, May 12th, that'll be appreciated. So be on the lookout for that.
And I would suggest on that, like looking at the topics that you all brainstormed back in, I think, December, there's a lot of ways you could go with this topic. There's a lot of different people you could bring. And so even if you're not interested in co-leading this one, as you read the description, if there's a certain angle that you're curious about, maybe send that around to the group so that we know to invite the right people. I have some ideas of some folks that we could bring, but it's literally a very wide spectrum of who we could invite to talk about these different topics. And we might do that. Maybe a panel conversation or maybe several smaller presentations might work. But really think about what are the big questions within, there's a lot of topics in there. Within those topics, where do you want to go? What do you want to learn?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So that is time now, 7:30. I just want to thank everyone for being here this evening. And hope you guys all have a wonderful evening. And if you're on spring break, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your spring break.
Great meeting. Thank you.